Very good morning, all of you. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to be here. Being also the first presentation, I would open with, I try to make the presentation very elementary and try to focus on why we are doing what we are doing. Here we means the free and open source software community as a whole. So this is roughly the outline. I'll start with a very fundamental right of every human being, which is the right to read, which essentially means, technically you call it interpretation. And of course, read to write, that is to encode. And then what happens if we don't take care of our own basic cultural practices in a proper way? And of course, I will also be talking some into the political space, because we are working hard to change the policies of e-governance as well as digital society as it is emerging in almost all parts of the world. And therefore, there are certain issues related to policy and which I would be touching upon. And in that process, I would talk about who are the people who are imposing the roadblocks or inserting the roadblocks on our path to freedom. So, as mentioned by the chairperson just a while ago, we all write on a piece of paper or we print on a piece of paper, which of course can be used by anyone who learned the language in which it is written. A digital document, on the other hand, and an electronic document, on the other hand, can be used only by those who have access to the decoder. Now, the primary purpose of a digital document is to use it in future. In fact, that is one of the arguments given for digitizing everything. It should be readable and interpretable as long as possible, ideally forever. If the decoder is proprietary, written in a private language, your own ideas encoded in a digital document are at the mercy of the owner of the decoder. So now we have, the decoder essentially is the software. In this case, a proprietary software. And now proprietary software has an owner. And now you are at the mercy of that owner to always decode, that is interpret and read your own document. So in this process, you lose your right, the fundamental right, and access to read your own documents. So this possibility is dangerous in a digital society. So let's look at a very simple example. Our ancient forefathers, they knew that they're going to die, but then they left with us some of their memories, and they engraved on a hard stone, thinking that their thoughts will be passed on because the stone will be undisturbed. Because, I mean, if you write it on a paper, it may get disintegrated. But if you write it on a stone, it's much more difficult to destroy. So they engraved it on the stone. But what they forgot in the process is that the rules of decoding the symbols written on that stone were not part of the stone. So we carried only the code till today. We see the picture, but we don't know how to read it. We don't know how to decipher that particular language in which it is written. So in the current state of digitization, if you are using proprietary software, mind you, all your documents are stones written, because you'll be forgetting how to read them, not after millions of years, but after 5-6 years itself. Because if many of you have ever written documents 10-15 years ago, you try to open those documents on your current operating system, you'll come to know what I'm talking about. So the documents that you have written using the same Microsoft Office 10 years ago, you'll find it very difficult to read today. And sometimes you lose much of the formatting, much of the instructions that are written there, and you find it very difficult to read. So this is basically what we're talking about. So the life of a digital document is what is very important. So code without interpretation is a stone in the cave. Our ancestors inscribed on a hard stone with the hope of preserving their expression. They managed to preserve the code, but not its interpretation. So that's the lesson that we have to learn from this. An unused language becomes a stone, and using a language means interpreting it over and over again. How to preserve then cultural assets like documents, languages, music, science, mathematics, and databases and things like that? Because that's what we plan to use our computers for. If you want to protect material assets, we keep them under lock and key, or somewhere in a museum or in a bank locker, and take measures to ensure that they are not lost. But if you want to protect cultural assets, including digital documents, lock and key will be a disaster. The only way is to remember is to publicize the syntax and semantics in every possible corner of the world. Cultural assets are preserved by distributing, by diffusion, and also by using. The best way of diffusion is by using a standard practice, such that it becomes a culture and remains with us for a long time. Therefore, if we want to preserve documents, whether digital or whichever media, publish the syntax and semantics of the documents and make them accessible as free standards using exclusively free software. So let us all together declare all private or proprietary languages as criminal in all civil societies. The purpose of this message is to convince the policymakers and all those who do e-governance to declare proprietary software and document formats a crime. Else large companies will become mafias of the digital society. Well, you may think that I'm using very strong words like crime, mafia. So let me defend why I say so. So who is part of this mafia? Let us see. So you have proprietary software companies. I don't have to name them. There are a lot of industry organizations. In India, we have NASSCOM, an industry organization, a software industry organization. We have a general organizations called Confederation of Indian Industries. We also have FICCI, and we also have MATE, a manufacturing association. So these are some of the examples of industry organizations. Currently, these organizations do not understand the importance of open standards. And they are coming on our way to create a policy in India for open standards. So who are protecting the interests of these companies against these interests of these people? So usually companies, of course, are not bad. There are several free software companies sitting here, and they provide services for using free software. The governments also, of course, are not always bad. There are several governments who have been mandating the use of free and open source standards. Particularly in India, we have a southern state called Kerala, which is the only state in Kerala, in India, which has a policy, an ICT policy, and that mandates the use of not only free software, but also open standards for their public e-governance, particularly education. So the interesting case here is that in India, an expert committee has been set up to advise on standards. So they have given their recommendations. So the committee has recommended open standards for public administration. So they have done a good job. However, the committee recommended a single standard for one single application. And they also mentioned very clearly that since it has to be open standard, it should also be royalty free. Among, of course, several other nice recommendations. But the industry bodies reject these recommendations, the industry bodies that I mentioned some time ago. And they came on our way. And they said that we need multiple standards. And they also asked that this document that has been written by the technical experts should be modified to even allow for rand. I'll explain what is a rand a little while later.